Halloween was right around the corner, and as usual, Sarah was bubbling with excitement. She loved this holiday more than any other, always looking for new ways to immerse herself in the spooky atmosphere. This year, she had volunteered to help a friend, Ashley, decorate her house for a big party they were throwing. Sarah had mentioned it a few days ago, casually tossing the idea over dinner. I had offered to help too, thinking it would be a fun way to spend time together, but Sarah had politely refused. "No, Jack, it's fine. Ashley and I have it covered. It's just a girl's thing, you know. We'll be done before you know it." I remember nodding at the time, not thinking much of it. Sarah was always independent like that, and I trusted her. So, on that crisp October afternoon, I found myself alone at home, waiting for her to come back. Time dragged on, and the evening sky turned into night. Still, no sign of Sarah. I texted her to check in, but the message didn't go through. Odd. Maybe she was in a place with bad reception, I thought, trying to push away the growing unease. I went about my night, fixing dinner, watching TV, and scrolling through social media to kill time. An hour turned into 2, then 3. It wasn't like Sarah to be this late without at least sending a text, especially when she knew I was waiting at home. My mind wandered as I sat on the couch, staring at the TV without really watching it. What if something had happened? Maybe her phone had died, or she had car trouble. I tried calling her again, but it went straight to voicemail. A knot of worry twisted in my gut, making it hard to sit still. To distract myself, I opened Facebook, mindlessly scrolling through the endless stream of Halloween posts. Then, I saw it, a new photo uploaded by Ashley, tagged an hour ago. It was a group shot, a bunch of them standing in front of a house covered in cobwebs and skeletons, all smiles. My heart sank. There, in the center of the photo, was Sarah. But it wasn't the festive atmosphere or the decorations that caught my attention. It was the man next to her. His arm was wrapped around Sarah's waist, pulling her close, and she was smiling up at him. Something about the way they stood together, the ease in their body language, gnawed at me. It wasn't the kind of casual pose you'd expect between two people who were just friends. My stomach churned as I clicked on the photo, zooming in on Sarah's face. Her smile was bright, carefree, but there was something in her eyes, something that made my blood run cold. I stared at the photo for what felt like an eternity, my thoughts swirling. Who was this guy? And why was he so comfortable with my wife? I had never seen him before, and yet here he was, acting as though they were more than just acquaintances. I tried to reason with myself, convincing my brain to stop jumping to conclusions. Maybe he was just a friend of Ashley's, maybe he was being friendly in a completely innocent way. But deep down, a sinking feeling settled in the pit of my stomach, refusing to leave. I closed my laptop and stood up, pacing the room as my mind raced. The more I thought about it, the more the little things started to add up. Sarah had been distant lately. She spent more time with Ashley than usual, going out with her on weekends, or disappearing for hours at a time. She always had an explanation: errands, work, helping out a friend. I had never questioned it before, trusting that she was just busy, but now, with that picture burned into my mind, I couldn't shake the thought that something wasn't right. An hour passed, then another, and still no word from Sarah. My phone remained silent. I checked the time, 11:30 p.m. It was far too late for decorating a house. I sent another text, my fingers shaking slightly as I typed. Hey, where are you? Getting a bit worried. Call me when you get this, No response. I sat back down on the couch, my eyes fixed on the front door, waiting for it to open, for her to walk in with some simple explanation that would put my mind at ease. But the minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. The house was too quiet, the ticking of the clock on the wall too loud. Finally, around midnight, I heard the faint sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My heart leapt, a strange mix of relief and dread washing over me. I heard the front door unlock, the familiar creak of the hinges as Sarah stepped inside. She was carrying a small bag of decorations and humming softly to herself, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. "Hey," she said with a bright smile when she saw me. "Sorry, I'm late. We got a bit carried away with all the decorations." I tried to keep my expression neutral, though I could feel the weight of the earlier discovery pressing down on me. "I saw the photo on Facebook," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "Looked like quite a crowd." "Oh yeah, Ashley invited a few more people to help out. It was fun." She kicked off her shoes and headed to the kitchen, clearly not sensing anything wrong. I followed her, my chest tight. "Who was the guy in the picture? The one with his arm around you?" For a split second, I saw her freeze, just a moment, barely noticeable, but I caught it. She turned to face me, her smile faltering just a little. "Oh, him? That's just, Mike. He's a friend of Ashley's." Her explanation came too quickly, her voice just a bit too light. I stared at her, my heart pounding in my ears. I wanted to believe her, but something in the way she said it felt off, forced. And I couldn't shake the image of that photo, of the way Mike had held her. I nodded slowly, not wanting to push further, not yet. But inside, the doubts had already taken root, spreading like poison through my thoughts. I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing for sure: this Halloween was about to reveal more than just the usual tricks and treats. The next day, Sarah was up early, moving about the house with a renewed energy that seemed almost too eager. She mentioned that she was heading back to Ashley's to finish decorating. "We already did the outside yesterday," she explained casually over breakfast, "but we still need to do the inside. We're planning on going all out for the party, so it's going to take some time." I sat across from her at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee and watching her closely. After last night, the image of that photo had stayed with me, gnawing at my thoughts. I had barely slept, turning over every possible explanation for what I had seen. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, the doubt wouldn't go away. "Who's going to be there today?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but I could hear the edge in my voice. I couldn't help it. I needed to know. I needed reassurance, something to ease the anxiety that had settled deep in my gut. Sarah looked up from her coffee, her eyes briefly flickering with something, annoyance? "No, I couldn't be sure." "Oh, just Ashley and some of her friends again," she said lightly. "The same group from yesterday." I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral. "Look, I don't want to sound overbearing," I started slowly, "but could you make sure to answer your phone today? I was worried last night when I couldn't get a hold of you." Sarah's smile faltered for a split second, but she quickly recovered, brushing it off with a wave of her hand. "Oh, I'm sorry about that. My phone must have been on silent or something. But don't worry, I'll keep it on me today." She smiled again, this time wider, as if to reassure me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. It wasn't just the photo or the fact that her phone had been unreachable. It was her whole demeanor, the way she seemed so distant, like she was keeping something just out of reach. I nodded again, forcing a smile. "Okay, just let me know if anything changes." "I will, I promise," she said, finishing her coffee and getting up from the table. "I'll probably be back late again, but don't wait up. We have a lot to do." I watched her grab her things and head toward the door, her phone tucked into her bag, her steps light and quick. "I'll see you tonight," she called out as she left, the sound of the door clicking shut behind her. For a long moment, I sat there in silence, staring at the now empty space where Sarah had been. Something about the way she had brushed off my questions didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just that I couldn't reach her last night, it was how easily she had dismissed it, like it was no big deal. I spent the rest of the morning pacing around the house, trying to focus on anything else, but my mind kept circling back to the same nagging thoughts. Who exactly were these friends she was spending so much time with? And why did I feel like she was hiding something from me? After an hour of staring at the clock, I picked up my phone and opened Facebook again, scrolling through the photos from yesterday's decorating session. The same image stared back at me, Sarah and Mike, his arm casually draped around her, that easy smile on her face. The more I looked at it, the more I couldn't ignore the way they seemed so comfortable together, like this wasn't just a one-time thing. I closed the app and sat back, my mind racing. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband, constantly checking up on his wife, but the pit in my stomach wouldn't go away. I needed answers. Night fell, and the quiet of the house pressed in on me as I waited for Sarah. I had tried to distract myself throughout the day, throwing myself into work, doing odd jobs around the house, but as the hours ticked by and the sun disappeared, my mind was glued to thoughts of her. She had promised to answer her phone, and so far, she had kept her word. Around 9:30 p.m., my phone buzzed, and I practically jumped to answer it. It was Sarah. Her voice came through the line, cheerful, almost too cheerful, as though she had been drinking. "Hey, babe," she said, her words slightly slurred. "I'll be back soon, okay? We're just finishing up some stuff here. It's so much fun." In the background, I could hear laughter and the faint noise of music. It sounded like more than just a decorating party, but I brushed it off, telling myself it was probably just the atmosphere. Halloween parties tended to get rowdy, right? "Are you okay?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light, though inside, I felt a tightening in my chest. "You sound like you've had a few drinks." "Oh, just a little bit," she laughed, the sound high-pitched and carefree. "But I'll be back soon, promise." With that, she hung up, leaving me standing in the middle of the kitchen, staring at my phone. Something felt off, and the gnawing doubt I had been trying to suppress all day came roaring back. She had promised she'd come back soon, but I couldn't shake the feeling that her version of soon wasn't as urgent as mine. An hour passed. Then another. It was already getting late, far too late for a simple decorating party. My heart pounded as I checked the time again. Midnight had come and gone, and there was still no sign of Sarah. The house was too quiet, the ticking of the clock loud in my ears. I tried calling her, but it went straight to voicemail. No response. That nagging feeling in my gut turned into something darker, something closer to panic. I couldn't take it anymore. Grabbing my keys, I decided to go pick her up myself. I didn't care if she'd had too much to drink or if she wanted to stay out. It was late, and something didn't feel right. I needed to see her, to bring her home. As I drove toward Ashley's house, my mind raced with all kinds of thoughts, none of them good. What if something had happened to her? What if she was too drunk to drive? But deeper down, beneath all the rational worries, there was something else, a fear I didn't want to acknowledge, but that I couldn't shake. What if it wasn't just a Halloween party? When I pulled up to Ashley's house, it was darker than I expected. The street was quiet, with only a few dimly lit houses scattered along the road. Ashley's house was at the end of the street, partially obscured by trees, and the lights inside were barely visible through the windows. I parked the car a little ways down the road and got out, walking toward the house with a sense of dread hanging over me. The faint sound of music could still be heard from inside, but it was different now, softer, more muted. I hesitated at the edge of the driveway, staring at the house. Something was wrong, I could feel it in my bones. I moved quietly, walking around the side of the house, and approached the windows. My heart was pounding in my chest as I peered through the glass. At first, the dim lighting made it hard to see, but as my eyes adjusted, the scene inside became clearer, and what I saw made my stomach turn. The room was filled with people, all dressed in different Halloween costumes, masks covering their faces. But it wasn't the costumes or the masks that shocked me. It was what they were doing. Bodies were tangled together on the couch, on the floor, even on the table. People were draped over one another, their movements slow and intimate, their voices low and filled with lust. It was like something out of a nightmare, a twisted, depraved gathering that had nothing to do with the innocent decorating party Sarah had described. My breath caught in my throat as I scanned the room, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The lights were so dim, and with everyone wearing masks, I couldn't even tell where Sarah was. But I knew she was there, somewhere in that mass of bodies. My heart raced, and a wave of nausea rolled through me. The thought of Sarah being part of this, of her being involved in something like this, was too much to bear. I wanted to look away, to stop watching, but I couldn't tear my eyes from the scene unfolding in front of me. Every part of me screamed to go inside, to pull her out of there, to demand answers. But I was frozen, trapped by the horror of it all. I had never imagined something like this, not in my worst nightmares. Suddenly, one of the masked figures stood up, their body illuminated briefly by the flickering light. For a moment, I thought it might be Sarah, but the person turned, and I realized with a sickening lurch in my stomach that I had no way of knowing who any of these people were. They were all hidden behind masks, their identities lost in the chaos of the moment. I stumbled back from the window, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't watch this any longer. I turned and practically ran back to my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the keys. My mind was spinning, my thoughts a jumbled mess of disbelief, anger, and heartbreak. How could she? How could Sarah be part of something like this? My stomach churned as I slammed the door of the car, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. I couldn't go back in there. I couldn't face her, not like this. The drive home was a blur. My heart was shattered, my mind consumed with images I couldn't unsee. I had always trusted Sarah, always believed in her, but now everything felt like a lie. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I loved, had been swept away, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. When I got home, I sat in the car for a long time, staring blankly at the darkened house. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. All I knew was that the Sarah I had believed in was gone, and with her, the life I thought we had built together. Halloween had revealed its darkest, most twisted side, and I wasn't sure I'd ever recover from what I had seen. I sat in the car outside my house for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing and my heart pounding in my chest. The scene I had just witnessed at Ashley's house played on a loop in my head, those people, hidden behind masks, entangled in one another. I had no idea if Sarah was among them, but the thought that she might be haunted me. Every rational part of me screamed to leave it alone, to go home and forget what I'd seen, but I couldn't. I needed answers. I needed to know. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. There was no way I could sit here all night, replaying those images in my head without doing something. I had to find out if Sarah was in that room, if she was a part of whatever was happening. And there was only one way to do that. I had to go back. But not like this. I couldn't just walk in as myself. Everyone inside was wearing masks, hiding their identities behind elaborate Halloween costumes. If I wanted to find out if Sarah was in there, I had to blend in. I needed to become one of them, at least long enough to find her. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It was late, past midnight. There wasn't much time. I had to find something, anything, that could pass as a costume. I racked my brain, thinking about what I had at home. We didn't keep much in the way of Halloween decorations, but there had to be something I could use. With renewed determination, I stepped out of the car and hurried inside. The house was dark and silent, a stark contrast to the chaotic scene I had just left. I flicked on the lights and made my way to the closet, frantically searching for anything that could resemble a costume. Old coats, scarves, and winter gear, none of it was useful. My frustration mounted as I threw clothes aside, digging through boxes and bins. Then, in the back of the closet, I found it. It wasn't much, but it would have to do, a black cloak from an old costume party we had attended years ago, paired with a cheap plastic mask that resembled a skull. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to hide my face and blend in with the others. I pulled it on, adjusting the mask over my face, and stared at myself in the mirror. My reflection looked foreign, eerie, but that was the point. I couldn't afford to be recognized, not if Sarah was there. My heart pounded as I slipped out the door and headed back to the car. Every step felt heavier, the weight of what I was about to do pressing down on me. I had never imagined myself sneaking into a party like this, especially not one that felt so wrong. But I had no choice. I needed to know. The drive back to Ashley's house was a blur, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. When I pulled up to the house again, it looked the same, quiet, dimly lit, and unassuming from the outside. But I knew what was happening inside. My stomach twisted at the thought. I parked the car a little farther down the street this time, making sure not to draw attention. With the cloak draped over me and the mask in place, I stepped out and made my way toward the house. My heart raced as I approached the front door, but I couldn't go through the main entrance. There were too many risks. What if someone recognized me, or worse, what if Sarah saw me before I saw her? I slipped around to the back of the house, keeping to the shadows. The music was louder here, the faint hum of voices and laughter filtering through the air. My pulse quickened as I approached one of the side doors, which had been left ajar. Whoever was hosting this party clearly didn't care much for security. I took a deep breath, then stepped inside. The hallway was dark, illuminated only by flickering candles set along the walls. The atmosphere was thick, almost oppressive, as I moved deeper into the house. I could hear the sounds of people, voices, laughter, and other noises I didn't want to think about, growing louder as I approached the main room. My heart pounded in my ears as I walked, every step taking me closer to the truth. I reached the large living room where the party was in full swing. The dim lighting made it hard to see, but the scene was just as chaotic as it had been when I looked through the window. Bodies were everywhere, sprawled out on the couches, the floor, even the tables. People were draped over one another, their faces hidden behind elaborate masks and costumes, their movements slow and languid. The air was thick with the smell of alcohol and something else, something heavier, more intimate. I froze for a moment, my breath catching in my throat. The sight was overwhelming, surreal, like something out of a nightmare. I scanned the room, my eyes darting from one person to the next, trying to find her. But it was impossible to tell who was who. Everyone was in costume, their identities concealed behind masks. I moved carefully through the room, keeping to the shadows, my heart pounding in my chest. My eyes darted from one masked figure to another, searching for any clue that might tell me where Sarah was. But no one stood out. No one looked familiar. As I made my way deeper into the room, I began to doubt myself. What if she wasn't here? What if I had been wrong? But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a flash of blonde hair, barely visible beneath a mask. It was the same shade of blonde as Sarah's, and my heart skipped a beat. I moved closer, careful to keep my distance, my eyes locked on her. She was sitting on the edge of a couch, her body relaxed, leaning against another figure, one I didn't recognize. They were close, too close. My stomach churned as I watched them, my hands clenching into fists beneath the folds of the cloak. It had to be her. It had to be. I stepped forward, my breath catching in my throat as I closed the distance between us. But before I could get any closer, the figure beside her leaned in, whispering something in her ear. She laughed, the sound muffled beneath the mask, and stood up, pulling the other person with her. Together, they moved toward the far end of the room, disappearing into the shadows. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. I had come this far, and now, I had to know. With trembling hands, I followed them into the darkness, my mind racing with a million questions. But deep down, I already knew the answer. And I wasn't sure I was ready for it. I stood there in the dark, my breath coming in shallow, uneven gasps as I watched the figure I thought was Sarah slip away into the shadows with the man beside her. For a moment, my legs refused to move, my mind racing with the impossibility of what I had just witnessed. Could that really have been her? My wife, laughing and walking off with another man, in the middle of whatever debauchery was unfolding in this house? The mask on my face felt suffocating, the plastic pressing against my skin, making it hard to breathe. I wanted to tear it off and leave, to walk away from this nightmare before it consumed me. But I couldn't. Not yet. I had to be sure. I had to find her. I had to know for certain if Sarah was part of this or if my mind was playing cruel tricks on me. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before moving forward. The room around me was a blur of movement, bodies intertwined, people in costumes and masks, all lost in their own world. I kept my head down, trying not to draw attention to myself as I wove through the crowd. Every step I took felt heavier than the last, like I was dragging myself deeper into something I wasn't prepared to face. The dim lights flickered above, casting eerie shadows across the room, and the music seemed to pulse through the floor beneath my feet, making everything feel more surreal. I scanned the faces, or rather, the masks, of the people I passed, searching for any sign of Sarah. But it was impossible. Everyone looked the same under the disguises, hidden behind elaborate costumes that turned them into faceless strangers. I kept moving, my eyes darting from one group to the next, my heart pounding in my chest as I pushed deeper into the house. The scene grew darker, more intimate, as I ventured further. People were draped across each other, some lying on the floor, some leaning against walls, all completely absorbed in their actions. It was hard to believe that just a few hours ago, I had been sitting at home, thinking this was just another night. Now, I was in the middle of something I couldn't even begin to understand. I passed a couple, their masks slightly askew, locked in a slow, sensual embrace. For a brief second, I thought I caught a glimpse of blonde hair beneath one of the masks, but it wasn't Sarah. I felt a surge of frustration and panic rising in me. Where was she? I rounded a corner and entered a smaller room off to the side of the main gathering. It was quieter here, the music softer, but the atmosphere was still thick with the same charged energy. More people, more masks. I clenched my fists at my sides, my whole body tense with the need to find her, to see her face, her real face, not one hidden behind a mask. Then, through the flickering candlelight, I saw her. At first, I wasn't sure. It was the hair that caught my attention again, the familiar shade of blonde, just like before. She was sitting on a low couch, her legs curled up beneath her, her mask slightly tilted, revealing a glimpse of her face. And that face, those features, I knew them better than anyone. It was Sarah. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, I couldn't move. I stood frozen in place, staring at her, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Sarah was sitting next to a man I didn't recognize, his arm casually draped over the back of the couch behind her. She wasn't exactly leaning into him, but she wasn't pulling away either. There was an easiness to the way they sat together, a kind of comfort that made my stomach churn. I took a step closer, my breath catching in my throat as I got a better look at her. She was smiling, laughing, even, and it wasn't the forced, polite smile I had seen her use in awkward social situations. No, this was different. This was the smile she used when she was genuinely happy, the kind of smile that used to be reserved for me. My hands trembled as I clenched them into fists, the plastic mask digging into my skin. I wanted to scream, to march over there and pull her away from that man, to demand answers. But I couldn't. Not here. Not like this. I inched closer, trying to stay hidden in the shadows as I watched them. The man leaned in, saying something to Sarah that I couldn't hear, and she laughed again, her head tilting back slightly. It was a laugh I recognized, one I had heard 1,000 times over the years, but hearing it now, in this context, felt like a knife twisting in my gut. What was she doing? What was I doing? For a split second, I considered leaving. Walking away from all of this and pretending I hadn't seen anything. I could confront her later, at home, when the masks were off and we were just Jack and Sarah again. Maybe there was an explanation, something that would make this all go away. But deep down, I knew there wasn't. There was no innocent explanation for what I was seeing. My heart ached as I continued to watch her, my wife, sitting there with this stranger, so comfortable, so at ease. I didn't know how long I stood there, my mind spinning, my body frozen. It felt like time had stopped, like I was caught in some horrible dream I couldn't wake up from. But then, as if sensing my presence, Sarah suddenly looked up. For a moment, our eyes met, though her mask obscured most of her face. I could see the surprise in her eyes, the brief flicker of recognition. She knew. She knew it was me. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited for her to say something, to react, but she didn't. She just stared at me, frozen, as if she couldn't believe I was there. The man beside her glanced up, confused, but I didn't care about him. All I could focus on was Sarah, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, sitting there in the middle of something I couldn't even begin to understand. I took a step forward, my mouth dry, my voice caught in my throat. Sarah. She didn't say anything. Her eyes widened, and for a split second, I thought I saw a flash of guilt, but it was gone just as quickly as it had appeared. She stood up slowly, her movements careful, deliberate. The man beside her shifted, clearly unsure of what was happening, but I barely noticed him. It was just me and Sarah now. This was it. The moment I had dreaded and hoped for all at once. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, watching Sarah slowly get up from the sofa. The shock of finding her here, in the midst of this surreal dreamlike party, was still with me. I could not believe what I had just seen, and I did not know how to perceive the emotions that were raging inside me. Anger, distrust, jealousy, and, against all reason, an undeniable, inexplicable sense of excitement. Sarah's eyes locked on mine and she was silent for a moment. She just stood there, frozen, her body tense, like she was caught between two worlds, one where she was at this party, and another where I had just entered her reality, breaking the bubble she was in. Jack, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft hum of the music in the background. It's not what you think. I clenched my fists, trying to hold back the wave of emotion that washed over me. Isn't that what I think? Sarah, I saw you with him, I hissed, my voice quiet but shaking with anger and something else I couldn't name. What the hell is going on here? She looked around nervously. The man next to her shifted awkwardly before he seemed to decide it was best to leave, leaving us alone in the dimly lit room. Sarah looked back at me, her face pale under the mask. I didn't do anything, she stammered, her voice trembling. I had no part in it, Jack. I was just watching. I talked to several people. That's all. My heart raced, my mind torn between relief and suspicion. Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to admit that maybe she hadn't crossed any lines, but another part of me, the part that had been burning with jealousy all night, couldn't shake the image of her sitting so comfortably with this man, laughing, acting like she belonged here. Why didn't you leave then? I asked in a harsh voice. Why stay and watch this whole scene? Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes flashing with guilt and uncertainty. I don't know, she admitted quietly. It was, strangely intriguing. But I didn't do anything, Jack. I swear. I looked at her, jealousy was gnawing at me from the inside, twisting in my stomach like a knife. There she stood before me, looking vulnerable and defiant, and no matter what, I couldn't shake the pure desire that seethed beneath my anger. The confusion, the anger, the strange excitement, it all melted into something I couldn't control. A dark idea crossed my mind, and before I could stop myself, I gave in to it. Jealousy, adrenaline, a surge of emotions, everything took over. Spread your legs, I ordered in a gruff voice, surprising even myself. Sarah's eyes widened in shock and she froze for a moment, as if she wasn't sure if she heard me correctly. What? She whispered, her voice trembling between confusion and disbelief. You heard me, I said as I moved closer, my eyes locked on hers, the intensity of the moment making everything fade into the background. Spread your legs and sit quietly. Something flashed in her eyes, perhaps surprise or something closer to curiosity. She hesitated, but then slowly, almost cautiously, did as I asked. She sank back onto the sofa, her body tense, her legs spread wide enough to show her vulnerability. I fell to my knees in front of her, the world narrowing to the two of us, and without saying another word, I bent down, gently spreading my hands between her legs. My heart pounded as I pressed my lips to hers, the taste of her skin mixed with the heat of the moment sending a rush of electricity through my veins. I didn't think anymore, I just acted on pure instinct, on the raw emotions that had been boiling under the surface all night. Sarah gasped, her body twitching slightly in surprise. She didn't expect it from me or here. I could feel her hesitation, her uncertainty, but as I continued, my mouth moving over her, I felt her relax, her breathing shallow, her fingers digging into the couch beneath her. She moaned softly, the sound barely audible, but it was enough to turn me on. My tongue moved over her strawberry, teasing, tasting. Sarah had never seen me like this before, never seen this side of me. I have never acted like this, never taken control in such a bold, aggressive way. But tonight something changed. Something snapped inside me. Sarah's breathing quickened, her body responding to every movement of my mouth. I could feel her hips shaking under my hands, her hips starting to move, barely touching my face. She moaned again, louder this time, her fingers tangled in my hair as if she couldn't believe what was happening. "Jack," she whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of surprise and pleasure. But I didn't stop. I kept going, driven by the fire inside me, the jealousy and the desire swirling together into something I couldn't control. Her hand tightened in my hair, her breath coming in short, rapid bursts, and then, with a shuddering gasp, she came, her legs trembling as the wave of pleasure washed over her. I stayed with her, moving slowly now, more gently, until she collapsed back onto the couch. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The air between us was thick, charged with everything that had just happened. Sarah stared down at me, her eyes wide with disbelief, her breath still uneven. I've never seen you like this before," she whispered, her voice soft, almost awed. I sat back on my heels, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand, my own breathing still heavy. I wasn't sure what to say, wasn't sure what had just happened, or what it meant. All I knew was that something had shifted between us, something dark and raw and undeniably powerful. And, strangely, it felt like this whole twisted night had brought us closer. The jealousy, the anger, the lust, it had all blended into something that neither of us could have predicted. Sarah looked at me, her eyes still wide, and I could see the same realization dawning on her face. This party, as strange and unsettling as it was, had done something to us. It had awakened something. "Maybe this party wasn't such a bad thing after all," Sarah murmured, her lips curling into a small, breathless smile. I stared at her, still trying to catch my breath, still trying to process everything that had happened. And for the first time that night, I allowed myself to smile back. This party, this night, it had changed something between us. Something I hadn't expected, but something I couldn't deny.